I mean, it's like running and jumping and shooting with a gun at your enemy. It's very, very difficult. You have to calculate this thing precisely. And on the top of that, this object in the air, in the sky, the space station, is not static. It is called a geostatic. Relative to the Earth, it is supposed to be static. But it is also moving. It's also moving with the Earth. And when you shoot, you have to calculate the trajectory so that you then hit this invisible thing, small, tiny thing in the atmosphere. Imagine the amount of mathematical knowledge that is needed. But can you get this mathematical knowledge in our language? It's not available. Let's be frank. I'm very proud that I'm a Malay, that my language is Malay, it's not English. But I have to learn this in English. I studied medicine in English. Of course, now I can translate some of the things into Malay, but I find great difficulty translating into Malay without using English words. And we are using a lot of English words today in the Malay language. Can you use English words if you don't understand the words? Then you will borrow and use the word incorrectly, and that will be difficult for us. But this is just digressing. This is my favorite subject, so since I have a captive audience, I thought that I might vent my displeasure with the government over this issue. But believe me, education is about acquiring knowledge. Education is not entirely about learning how to speak your own language or write in your own language. Education is about acquiring knowledge. And in order to acquire knowledge, you need to understand the language of knowledge. And the language of knowledge today is English. There was a time when the language of knowledge was Arabic. You know about the Arabs. When they became Muslims, they were told that they must read. And to read means to acquire knowledge. What was there to read? Initially, there was no kitab and books on Islam being published. So they read about the findings of the Greek philosophers, the Greek mathematicians, the Greek scientists, the Indian numerologists and others. They learn the knowledge that has already been discovered by other people, and they acquire it. Having acquired this knowledge, then they add to this knowledge through their own research. And so books came out, written in Arabic, books on new knowledge. After the Islamization of the Arabs came to the world in the Arabic language. There were great libraries in Cordoba in Spain, in Baghdad, in Iraq, great libraries where all this knowledge are kept in the great libraries in book form, mostly handwritten. That is the sum of knowledge available at that time. And as you know, the Muslim Arabs was able to create the greatest civilization of the age. They were much more civilized, much more progressive than all the rest of the world. The Europeans at that time were living in what is now known as the Dark Ages. Why the Dark Ages? It is because the Europeans were very ignorant. They know nothing about science. Well, they know something about science, but not as much as the Arabs. They didn't know much about philosophy, about thinking and all that, about the way to think and analyze things. So they saw how the Arabs were progressing. Just as today we saw how the Europeans were progressing. In those days, the Europeans were looking at the Arabs because the Arabs created this great civilization. And they decided that in order to make progress, they had to learn Arabic, to access the knowledge of the Arabs, which were found in the great libraries in the Muslim world. We find it difficult to think, but for a long time, the Spanish people spoke only Arabic. They couldn't speak Spanish. And many of the priests in Europe decided that they must acquire this knowledge from the Arabs. And so they studied Arabic and they went to the libraries to acquire the knowledge. So with that knowledge, they built the present European civilization based on science, because the Arabs were the greatest scientists in those days. Unfortunately, this was about the 15th century, when the Europeans acquired the knowledge, the scientific knowledge, especially of the Arabs themselves decided to discard this knowledge. They said that it is secular knowledge, it's not about religion, so it doesn't give you merit in the afterlife. So you see what happened was that the Europeans acquired Arab knowledge, Arab scientific knowledge, and they progressed. The Arab discarded this scientific knowledge and they regress. So we find today that the Europeans are way ahead of the Arabs in terms of science, in terms of knowledge in every field. So in order to acquire knowledge, you have to learn the language of the people with the knowledge. The Europeans wanted the Arab knowledge. They studied Arabic. Their priests studied Arabic and translated this into Latin and did research after that in their own languages. And today, most of them use English as the language of research. So it is important for us, in order to cope with the changes that is happening around us, to learn the language of knowledge. What is the language of knowledge today? Mainly it is English. But other languages too can contribute towards us. I'm not saying that the Arabic language is completely useless. It is still useful, but scientific knowledge is coming to us today in English. And therefore, not only in the 21st century, even in the last century, the people with the knowledge are the people who have good command of English. Then they can follow the changes, the new discoveries that were made in other parts of the world, written in English, and therefore they become better and more knowledgeable people. And this contributed towards their growth and their civilization. So I'm glad that the UTP teaches in English. It's not a loss. You are not losing. You don't become an Englishman. You know, I'm speaking to you in English now. Am I an Englishman? Oh no, you know, I'm still a Malay, very much a Malay. I'm a Malay Muslim. Just because I speak English doesn't make me an Englishman. But you need English in order to cope with the expanding field of knowledge that we are living in today. We need all the knowledge in order to cope with changes. There will be changes. There will be changes all the time. What is accepted today may be rejected tomorrow. What is the limit today may not be the limit tomorrow. So knowing this, we have to prepare ourselves. The graduates of the 21st century will have to acknowledge that the field of knowledge has expanded and the depth of knowledge has also been made much deeper and greater. So you need to all the time acquire knowledge so that you can deal with the changes that is taking place around us. And the changes that is taking place, it's not always about politics. Of course, we see some people who see only political changes or they talk about freedom, freedom of expression, freedom of this and that, LBGT and all that.